We lived in Colorado Springs until I was in about the 5th grade. I remember the Biltmore or the Broadmoor Hotel and the mountains to the west of Colorado Springs, the Garden of the Gods and those places. Kind of dull. There wasn't much happening there. I remember the flood in 1936. Flood wiped out a good part of the downtown area and the bridges. My dad took me down, carried me on his shoulders. We got about knee deep in the water when the water started rising. But I remember we lived up on a hill. Used to slide down the hill in the wintertime on a sled. The entertainment was hiking with my dog Sam, especially in Grand Junction. We would go to the west out in the hills in the west and hike out there. And there was a lot of area to be explored. It was very rocky, and I remember one time we climbed up in an area where there was some crevices. We went down into the crevices and came out to the end of it, and it was a sheer drop-off of about 100 feet. There was hardly any handholds or anything to walk around, and we were edging along the edge of this rock wall, and I started to fall. Reached up and grabbed a plant that was sticking out of the rocks, pulled myself up in the straight up position, and the plant broke off my hands, or I'd have been 100 feet down. My dad was working for the railroad, and he kept striving to get a better paying job. And so he went from Colorado Springs to Durango to Gallup, New Mexico, and then back. And then a number of things happened in Gallup, New Mexico. When we were living there for a short period of time, a couple of months or so during the summer, they have an annual Navajo Nation festival there. And it's huge. The Indians will be out there dancing, and we could feel the earth shake in our house, which was a quarter of a mile away. We moved to Grand Junction. I remember that day, my dad came home and said, "Hurry up, we got to pack the car and get out of town. They're going to come and repossess our station wagon, one of the Ford Woody station wagons." And we loaded it up with our belongings, just threw all of our belongings in the back of it and raced out of town before they repossessed the car. We went up to Cripple Creek because we had friends there. Aunt Anna and Uncle Clyde and the rest of them were living in Cripple Creek. And we went up and spent 2 or 3 days and then went on into Grand Junction because my dad had a job there. He was always working to get a better job and improve the economic status of the family. And he took a welding course through the railroad. And when he graduated from the welding course, they handed him a set of travel orders that said he would report to Richmond, California, to the Kaiser shipyards. And he said, "I don't want to go to California and the Richmond shipyards." So, well, there's another set of orders here. You may want to take a look at them before you make that decision. That would send you to Fort Bliss, Mississippi in the Army. So we packed up our car and came to California. But there are a number of interesting things happened along that trip. We had to go down over Independence Pass, which goes from Cripple Creek down into the Utah desert, and the brakes went out. My dad drove down the road, only using the compression on the cars to braking and coming down. Then Mother drove the car out through the desert in Utah and ran out of gas in the middle of the desert. And the only thing around when we got out of the car was a railroad track, and there was a railroad work crew came through with one of those hand pumping little cars. So they were traveling down the railroad tracks. My dad flagged them down, and they went to the nearest utility facility that they had and got about 5 gallons of gas, came back and put it in our car, and we continued on to California. California, I remember driving across the Bay Bridge and being amazed by the height of the buildings that we saw, and just seeing that many people and that many cars in California. I had been to 5 different elementary schools, and when my folks decided to buy that gas station and move to Hayward, I had made friends in elementary school, St. Joseph's Elementary School. I went on to St. Mary's, and I wasn't about to start making new friends. So for the last 3 years of high school, I commuted back and forth from Hayward to Berkeley to go to St. Mary's High School. Oh, there was only 3 things in high school. There was music, girls, and football. And that's about all I remember about high school. Played all 4 years on one of the teams. The JVs the first year, and then the last 3 years in the varsity. Went to see Lou Waters and Turk Murphy and Bob Scobie. They would play at night, stop playing at about 11:30 or 12, and then they'd go across the street to a small restaurant that had a dining room in the back, and they'd go back and have a jam session till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. My mom was taking care of the family and keeping the house and cooking meals and saving money, and she was really concentrating on the family. My dad opened an auto parts store after he sold the gas station. Oh, he enjoyed working on mechanical things, and he built the boat, the Tommy Tucker, he christened it, and he loved to water ski. They leased a cabin down at Coyote Lake, and we would go down there for water skiing. And besides that, we also went up to the San Joaquin River near Stockton and would water ski up there. I was off to the seminary, I think, at the time when he bought the cabin down there. I went down there a few times, but he and my Uncle Johnny operated Tennyson Auto Parts. And I think he was most happy there with having his own business that he could control. I think one of the things that they always felt was important was to love one another and to look out for one another. A lot of times there are traumatic events that happen in your life that start you thinking about, why am I here and where do I go when this is over? A friend of mine, Howard Shields, was taking flying lessons, And he called me one morning and said, "Hey, I got my license yesterday. I'm going to go for my first solo flight. Would you like to go on the flight with me?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I would." And so I had usually given him a ride to school in Berkeley. So I said, "I'll come by and pick you up at 8 o'clock, whatever it was." My dad heard that conversation. He said, "If you cut school one more time, I'm going to have you." So I called Howard back and said, "I can't do it. My dad will do it to me if I cut school again." Howard tore the wing off of the airplane that day, and he died. He died in the crash. I think that was when I started thinking, well, why are we here? Where do we go off after this? And figured the safest place to be was in the seminary, which was a mistake. Ended up going to the seminary with Pat Reed, Bob Rush, and Bob Grange, and Paul Raftery. All five of us went up to the...
And all future saints.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt. Everybody left except Paul Raftery. He was the only one that really stayed in the Dominicans. The rest of us left within about 3 years. And we had some funny things happen. We went to Mount Angel, the very strict Benedictine monastery, and they have an introduction ceremony that you go through. Basically, they line you up in the chapel and tell you that yes, we know you're all sinners, but we're going to fix that. About 3 years later, Pat and I joined the Air Force together. We went down to San Antonio, Texas, and they lined us up the first day and said, "You mofos are no good, but we're going to fix that." And I turned to Pat and said, "Have you heard this somewhere before?" I got put in the barracks with the guys primarily from California. Pat got put in the barracks with people primarily from Georgia. I don't know how he got split up, but his tour of duty was not as enjoyable as mine. He, in fact, ended up being a chaplain's assistant in the Air Force to none other than a guy named Father Moss, who eventually became our pastor here in Mountain View. I met Mary Morris on New Year's Eve in 1950. I was on the way home from Hamilton Field. I was stationed over at Hamilton Field in Marin County at that time. And for some reason, I came up Colusa Avenue. And when I did, I drove by a house where Bob Rush's car was parked out in front. And I thought, well, I'll go see what he's going to do on New Year's Eve. Knocked on the door and went in and found out they were going to a New Year's Eve party. So he said, why don't you come along? I said, well, I don't have a date. It was a couples thing. He looked at Mary and said, well, why don't you come with her? And she was sitting next to this tall guy, and it was her brother, Dick. And so Bob Rush said, oh, that's just her brother. So I invited her and she accepted to go to the party together. And we were actually engaged within 6 weeks. But we didn't tell anybody because Mary's mother was not too happy that she was linking up with me. We didn't go around advertising our engagement until we finally set a date for that September. Her mother never wanted to participate in the wedding at all. She wasn't even going to, she threatened not to attend the wedding. And the only reason she decided she and the rest of her family decided to attend our wedding was because some family was coming out from Illinois, and they thought it would be improper for her not to be there. But she never paid anything to support the wedding. We had to go get a loan. It took us about 3 years to pay off the loan for the wedding, but we started out on our own, free from her. Well, when I was discharged from the Air Force, one of the guys in the squadron with me was the foreman at a Volkswagen agency in Berkeley. It was the only Volkswagen, Porsche, and Mercedes dealership in the East Bay. And so he hired me, and since I was a journeyman aircraft mechanic, that was in the same union as auto mechanics. So it qualified me to be paid as a journeyman auto mechanic. The only thing wrong with that was that the owner of the agency had the audacity to think I ought to produce journeyman work if he was going to pay me journeyman wages. And I was behind the power curve on every job I took. I could change oil and fix flat tires, but anything else out of that, I was in over my head. I hated the job, and I was commuting from Walnut Creek to Berkeley. And then one day I ran into a guy I went to high school with, Norm Savoy, and he was on the Lafayette Fire Department. And I was telling him how I really didn't care much for the job I was doing. He said, well, why don't you go take the test for the Walnut Creek Fire Department? And I said, I don't know. I don't know anything about that kind of work. Sounds kind of boring to me. And he said, well, you work 1 day on, 1 day off, 1 day on, 1 day off, and then you get 3 days off in a row. I said, no kidding. So that was my motivation for getting in the fire department. It stopped my commuting, paid me a little bit more than a journeyman auto mechanic, and started a career. The ability to learn all the stuff you had to learn on fire chemistry, fire activity, first aid. And I think the most interesting thing was working together as a team. Something would happen, the bell would ring, and you'd go out the door, and you never knew what you were going to be facing until you got there. And it was up to the team to work out a way to resolve an issue, and usually helping people. A guy named Jerry DeWart and I started studying to become a captain. We'd studied for about 2 years. I was gone on vacation in Oregon. We were on an Oregon trip, and the job in Mountain View opened up for a fire captain. And Jerry DeWart submitted an application for me, although I was out of town on vacation. And we both came down and took the test, and I passed it and he didn't. So I have Jerry to thank for this job here. I enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed what I did, and I was willing to put the extra effort into it to handle problems when they came up, whether they be auto accidents, medical problems, chemical incidents, or just plain old fires. The ability to be prepared and to work as a team was really interesting. I made assistant chief within a year after I made captain. Came down here and was appointed as assistant chief, and the city manager, as most city managers are, wanted to improve the management capabilities of their fire chiefs and police chiefs and all the department heads. So they had the University of Santa Clara start a program called Introduction to Management for municipal workers. And there were 9 elements to the course. Non-credit, just something that these guys that had been out in the world working in management in the corporate world put together this course. And one of the segments of it was a thing called Management by Objectives. And I was fascinated by that because the theory was that everybody in an organization should have a common agreement on why they were there, what they were doing, and how they were going to accomplish it. And it was very clear that that was not happening in the Mountain View Fire Department. So I started working on a process called Management by Objectives for fire departments. I ended up establishing a plan, and we went to a meeting in San Francisco where the United States Fire Administration was being formed, and they were having hearings to write a report called America Burning that talked about the problems that needed to be solved by fire departments. The guy heading up the group at that time was a former city manager from San Diego, and he wanted to make some changes, and he was looking for a program. And after I explained what we had done in Mountain View, about 2 weeks later, I got a call to come back to Washington to write Chapter 4 of America Burning, which was master planning. And then that went on to become the first real project of the United States Fire Administration. We selected 20 cities around the country to implement the theory. We had an outfit in Santa Barbara, a consulting firm, that actually did all the detailed work of writing up the manuals and all. And then we went around to visit these 20 agencies around the country. And that's when I met a guy named Bill Neville, who was the one of the deputy fire chiefs of LA City. And LA City and Mountain View were the co-sponsors of the project. So Bill and I went around and helped cities implement it. And then when both of us retired, we both went out as consultants and did it as private consultants. So that was the trigger that really caused my career to take off, because it was something I saw was real, was needed, and it was just enjoyable. Once the master planning got moving, the first conference that the U.S. Fire Administration organized was in Disney World, Florida. And the main topic of that conference was master planning. And I was a keynote speaker at that conference. And then we got the name of knowing something about planning for fire protection. So when the U.S. Fire Administration would get a request from somebody to do a fire protection training, particularly a management training, they called on us. And Bill DeVille and I in particular went off and had some interesting times. Iran, we were there in theory, to provide fire protection for their customs facility. They'd had a multi-million-dollar fire at a customs facility up on the Caspian Sea. And in theory, they said they wanted to prevent any major losses to their import facilities. But they were really looking for some way to fight Iraq. And we I was there as a tourist looking around, and I was walking around Tehran. And I've had people say, I don't believe anybody was walking around Iran. They were shooting Americans at that time, because it was only 3 or 4 months later that they threw the Shah out and they had the big rebellion. Then I was contacted privately to do master plans for cities. And I worked with about 50 cities around the country. The nice thing about it was I was living in Bear Valley at the time. And so I could go out and do cross-country skiing in the morning, hop on an airplane at the local airport, fly to any city in California and do my consulting and be back in Bear Valley by night.
Malawi, one of the poorest countries in the world, is known as the warm heart of Africa.
How do you develop small communities? And I think we have to remember that's not our job. I think we said from the very beginning, we wanted to provide education. So whatever that education is, if it's a quality education, it will lead them to be self-sufficient and to be looking out for one another. And they really have to figure that out for themselves. There's a mix of their culture and their history that all gets put together in some form. And we don't know what that form is. And the best we can do is provide them with an education and an economic system that'll support it. I guess what bothers me from an American viewpoint is they're unwilling to take the moves that will make the improvements that they need. They look upon the outsiders, the NGOs or the outside world to provide the improvements. The outside world doesn't understand what they need or what would be accepted. They've got to develop the leaders that will lay that out and have irrigated agriculture, tree farms, grind mills, whatever it is. I don't know. It's part of the whole cultural thing that they may try and get ahead, but they don't have a lot of tools to get ahead with. But if they don't, they can always fall back on what their ancestors have done for the last 200 years. And they survived, didn't they? Well, I'm doing it because I think to complete the KEF project the way we design it is being done in honor of Mary. And that's why I'm doing it.
I see trees of green.
Well, they were all very happy events. Mary was able to survive them amazingly, although she had some real medical problems. She was able to survive those births and wanted to do more. She did a lot of what they used to call earning your bastard pay. She had a soft, gentle hand, but she also had a hammer when she needed to use it. She was essentially responsible for the character of the children. Sometimes you have to do things that are not pleasant, but it's part of the life instruction. My concept of parenting was love, patience, and yes, dear, you're right. I think what I've learned is that I was lucky enough to marry the perfect woman. There's a picture of our wedding where she's giving me a piece of cake, and I can just say that she gave me a lot more than cake. She taught an awful lot of life's truths. Very, very honest in what she thought about life, and she was very objective in looking through things. She always treated people with respect, but was not easily bamboozled by them. And I think that's part of the love all, serve all. You may treat people with respect, but you don't allow yourself to be taken in by them and to be abused or misused by them. What am I most thankful for? I would say I'm most thankful for Mary and for you kids. That's been the greatest achievement.